DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day, to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves me, you, him, her, them, and they to go make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy, one book, one show, one daily masterclass. This one right here that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic: victims are the new dictators. I think this is pretty much true. This is what we have created. We have either allowed to create, allowed to be created, or what we have, even through our intentional actions, have basically put this into place. You can see the other episodes. I'll refer you to other episodes on this show where I've talked about victims and whether it's victim mentality or why people become victims. Episode number 1613, why victimhood sells. Episode 1524, we are not victims. Episode 645, how to never be a victim. Episode 394, how to avoid ever becoming a victim. If you haven't listened to those episodes, again, go check those. The links are down below in the show notes. Now, why I'm doing this masterclass right here on why victims are the new dictators. Actually, before I answer that, let me tell you I have a text number where I want you to text me. Tell me the best insight or worst insight or anywhere in between that you got from today's masterclass. You'll also be receiving my daily motivation text. Once you're into my text community, my number is 305-384-6894. Again, 305-384-6894. Now, why this masterclass is because I see people who are now leveraging their victim status, whether real or imagined, as basically as a sword, as their new power that they can wield over other people's heads, that they are victims. Therefore, you had to do this thing. You must adjust to what I want. You must say this thing. You can't say that thing. And people have to kind of walk on eggshells around you because of your victim status. Now, it used to be not too long ago, that in order to create power in life, you used to actually have some strength. You had to actually have some ability, and you had to have some agency to create power in life. Now, you can be a victim and create power. Some of the most powerful people are the victims these days, and powerful people who use that power, people who actually have real power, they have real agency and some real substance behind what they're doing. If they are actually using that power, in many cases, they're being reclassified and labeled as toxic, like they're doing something wrong. They're using too much of their power, or they are also being labeled as privileged, or they're being labeled as just some form of being insensitive, not understanding all the leverage and power that they have, and not understanding that other people can have some as well. So the victims have basically learned, and this has been a great strategy by the victims here. I'm not even saying that they're wrong in a tongue-in-cheek type of way, but this has been a great strategy by them to take their victim status, which used to make you weak and have to lay on the ground. If you lay down, you stay down. Now they're actually using it to create power for themselves and create leverage for themselves. So this has been another sweet hustle. There's a lot of hustling going on these days, and listen, I respect hustle, but let's just point out, like I do in all of these episodes, we're just going to point out the game that's being played. So, of course, as always, you're not the one who is being played by the hustlers out there. Just respect that there's a hustle. Don't try to knock their hustle. Just understand that there is a hustle. Point number one. Today's topic, once again, is victims are the new dictators. Number one, due to the feminization of society and the subsequent emasculation of men that has occurred, as I talked about in episode 1841, someone becoming a passive, helpless victim is now the cool thing to be. Now, it used to be, again, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago, actually definitely 15 years ago, if you were a passive, helpless victim, you were a target. You were a person who got laughed at. You were a person who got clowned. You were a person who was looked down upon by society, and people would say, well, stop being a bitch. Stop being a pussy. Pull your panties up and get a backbone. Get some balls. Get some fortitude and do something for yourself. I told you about getting some balls in episode 1796. This is the way that we would look at and maybe even directly talk to people who were passive, helpless victims in their own lives. Again, not that long ago, just a generation or two ago, one generation ago, this is how we would look at people. This is how we would even talk to people. We would maybe even tell them directly. I know somebody like myself would, but now This has actually become the position of power. This has actually become a cool thing to be, is to be a victim and to feel like every time you see a police officer, you feel scared because you might lose your life, or to feel like as a black person, every time you go outside, you feel like you might not make it back home because the cop might be having a bad day and decide to shoot you. These are things that, again, this sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds like I'm being very hyperbolic here, but have you not heard people say this? And I'm talking about prominent people who have very high positions, who have high levels of visibility, and they are not saying it as a joke. They are being hyperbolic, but they're saying it as if they're serious. I mean, that's not a new statement to you, is it? Now, you've heard other people say these things. So this is where we're at right now, because this is what works for them. Being a victim is actually cool, and being in power, if you're a person who actually has real power, you're in power, that means that maybe you're abusing other people or somehow oppressing other people in order to have that power. This is where we are right now. That victims must be helped in some way. Victims are the new cool thing to be. I mean, we're building statues to people who were victims. They didn't do anything else. They had no other accomplishments that are newspaper worthy. But because they were a victim, we're going to build a statue to that person. And again, I don't understand what story are you going to tell somebody who doesn't know the story of that person, who sees the statue and says, okay, what did that person do in order to get a statue? Because that's usually why we build statues of somebody, because they did this thing, that thing, that thing. Usually somebody has a statue, they got like a laundry list of accomplishments, right? Things that they went out and did that are impressive, that put them in a position that we wanted to enshrine them by building a statue. Now, what if someone's only quote unquote accomplishment, I don't consider it an accomplishment, but let's just say that you do, their only accomplishment is being a victim? We're building a statue to that? Why? What do you want to tell your kids about this person? What did they do? What did they accomplish purposely that led them to having a statue? Well, you can't answer the question because the answer is nothing. So, I mean, what are you telling that kid? What is this indoctrinating that child to believe? Okay, so if I go become a victim, if I go have something happen to me, then I kind of become a hero. So now we got people angling to be victims so that they can get a statue too. So they can get their name on there'll be books written about schools, libraries, etc. This is what we're doing. And again, I'm not even saying that whether it's a negative or a positive thing. I'm just pointing it out because I just want y'all, as I say all the time, understand the game. The show is called Work on Your Game. Sometimes the game is the game that's being worked on you. So you just got to make sure the game's not being used on you. You got to peep game, as we say, so you know what's going on. Point number 2. Everything I told you in point number 1 leads to what I'm talking about in point number 2. Victims now wielding the power. On college campuses, for example, there was a change in law, a change in policy that was enacted by, I'll tell you who enacted it in a moment, but a change in policy that said on college campuses, males who are accused of sexual assault now have very little recourse and are not even allowed due process to defend themselves. And the universities, conversely, along with this, are encouraged to believe the accusing female much more and the defending male much less. Not based on evidence, ladies and gentlemen, but just because. For example, a student in college, let's say a male student has a sexual encounter with a female student. The male believes that it was consensual. And the female, though, comes out and accuses the male and says it was not consensual. Now, we'll never know whether it was or it wasn't, because this is all, it pretty much becomes a he said, she said thing. But here's what happens. Because the female is the one who accused the male, these students get brought to like a university court, which many have called a kangaroo court. And that's basically like, it's not really a real court because there's not real due process. People are not really given the same kind of rights you would get in a serious legal court, like a governmental type of court, where the male student, check this out, the male student who is accused of sexual assault on a college campus is not allowed to have their lawyer question the accuser. Let me say that one more time. I want to make sure you understand what I just said. If a male student is accused of sexual assault on a college campus, that male can go get a lawyer, but the lawyer is not allowed to question the female accuser who accused that male, that client, of sexual assault. There is no due process, meaning they're not allowed to go and get no evidence, and they're not allowed to fully defend themselves. They're not allowed to put their argument and state their case before the university court. None of these things are allowed, and everything has been weighted and shifted to believe the accuser. And this is possibly well-intentioned, but it's terribly executed, all behind the premise of believe women. This all went along with the Me Too movement. We gotta believe women, because there was a whole movement that happened years back. I think many of you remember it, and it's still going on to some degree, but it has been replaced pretty much by Black Lives Matter, and is all about race now. It's not so much about females anymore. Sorry, females, but it's really about being black now. So if you're a white female, forget it. You lost your time came and went. You had your 15 minutes, it's over. But what has happened now, because of this believe women thing, this was new policy put in through the government, and I'm going to explain that in a second, all behind this believe women thing, because of the idea that was put forth by some very prominent, influential people, and I'll get to them in a minute, that women had been behind the 8 ball for so long, that they had not been getting the same rights as men, that because men had been allowed to vote long before women had. You notice in some of how this rhymes with a lot of what's going on racially. This is the same thing that went on with females. Maybe this wasn't that long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. Many of you were alive when it was happening. So all these new policies and laws got put into place that weighted things in favor of females, even though it made things very, the word we got to use is unfair, logically unfair, legally unfair. We were talking in a governmental court, legally unfair, just to give women an unfair, let me not even use unfair, an unbalanced advantage over men in situations at which things need to be looked at objectively. If we're really talking in a reasonable way, things need to be looked at objectively, but we're not going to look at them objectively anymore. We're going to weight them in favor of the women. Why? Because women have been disadvantaged for so long that now we have to go it the other way to kind of overcorrect for the fact that women haven't had power for so long. That's pretty much what this rule did. And any of you knows of any of these situations, or any of you been in university in the last 10 years, maybe you've seen some of these happen. Maybe some of you have been involved, and maybe you read some of these stories, but they're out there. You're not allowed to question your accuser. Imagine you as a male being accused of sexual assault by a woman, and you're not allowed, your lawyer can't even question the woman who accused you, and then you have to go to court, and then the court is going to rule on it, and you haven't even been allowed to question the chick to find out if she's bullshitting or telling a lie, or maybe she's just trying to get revenge on you because she doesn't like the way the rest of the relationship went. This is a well-intentioned, I think, maybe well-intentioned, but terribly executed plan to quote-unquote believe women and support women. Oh, guess who introduced this legislation? If any of you don't know. This is introduced by one Barack Obama and his vice president, Joe Biden. Now, this is just one example, but there have been many. And the result of all of this, I'm just using that example just to tell you what the result of this has been, because again, we got to weigh everything by the outcomes, right? Being a victim is now a quick and easy way to do 3 things. Number 1, draw attention to yourself. Number 2, accrue a bunch of sympathizers, some of them silent sympathizers, some of them vocal. And number 3, tell everyone else what they need to do to make you whole again. We just had a couple weeks ago, from when I'm recording this, by the time you hear this, maybe the 2020/2021 Olympics, I don't know what they're going to call this since it got pushed back by COVID. The Olympics may have started. There was a woman who is I believe it was the hammer throw that she does. I don't even know the name of the event. Her name is Gwen Berry, Gwen Berry, Berry. Maybe it's BA. I don't know. Doesn't matter. You know who I'm talking about. Black woman. She was in the Olympic trials up in Oregon, and she did pretty well. She came in 3rd overall in the finals for the Olympic trials for her event, which is the hammer toss. Now, I don't know if any of you know anything about the hammer toss. I don't even know what the hammer toss event looks like. I don't even know what it looks like to toss a hammer, and I don't even know what the hammer is. But anyway, Gwen came in 3rd, which meant she qualified for the USA Olympic team. She is going to Tokyo to compete and represent America in the Olympics. While she's standing on the podium, being recognized for coming in 3rd at the trials, the 2 women who came in 1st and 2nd were white women. The national anthem starts playing over the loudspeaker in the stadium. Now, the reason the anthem started playing during that podium stand is because they would play the anthem usually around in the evenings, around 5 or 6 p.m., because that's when the more prominent events would begin. So that playing of the anthem was like the signal of, hey, here are the primetime events that most people pay attention to. So again, Gwen's event, nobody pays attention to. Nobody knows the name of people who do that event unless you happen to be deep into the world of track and field. So as the Hammer players are being recognized standing on the podium, the national anthem plays. Gwen grows upset because the national anthem is playing. Why? Because Gwen obviously is woke, obviously very strong BLM supporter, which is fine. Nothing wrong with being that. She turns her back from wherever the flag happens to be, turns away from it, turns her back to the flag, as the other two winners are standing there with their hands over their heart, not representing, but respecting the flag. She turns her back to show her disrespect to the flag. And later on, she's asked about it, of course. Of course, a photo was taken, of course. She gets asked about it, and she says, well, I felt like it was disrespectful. And she says, this is what Gwen says. She says, I feel like they played the anthem at that exact moment on purpose just to attack her, to antagonize her and piss her off. Well, Gwen, let me give you a news flash. All right? I don't think anything that happened in Oregon was targeted directly at you. You're in an event that nobody cares about, or maybe many people probably never even heard of until you did what you did. So it was an excellent publicity stunt, because now you draw attention to yourself and gain more prominence for your name than anything you could ever done, no matter how far you threw that hammer in your event. Even if you won the gold medal, nobody would have gave a damn. But because of what you did towards the flag, you have, again, gained more publicity for yourself than anything else you could have ever done in your particular sport. It was all a publicity stunt. Gwen knew exactly what she was doing, and it was well timed and well executed. And Gwen's going to get more endorsement money off of her blatant disrespect of the flag. No matter how you feel about the disrespect of the flag, she's going to get more money off of that gesture than she's going to get off anything she does in her actual performance. And again, anyone who disagrees with that, give me a logical argument as to how and why. I don't think there is one. But the whole point is her victimhood, because she went on and talked about how, she is BLM and she wants to draw attention to, the negative things that are happening to black people in America. I mean, it's straight from the Colin Kaepernick playbook. They all say the exact same thing. It doesn't matter exactly what they say. They're all saying the same thing. All right, I want to draw attention to these bad things that happen to black people in America, so I'm not going to show respect to the flag because of that, even though I'm going to go represent America in the Olympics and, try to get the biggest accomplishment of my life. Again, the two things don't even go together, but as I have explained to you many times on this show, it ain't about logic. This is a religion. It's not about logic. It's not about rational thinking, because if it was, they wouldn't be doing it. So you don't make a logical, rational argument to an emotional person. But we're pointing these things out anyway. So Gwen did that. And listen, I hope she goes on and wins her event at the Olympics, because if she doesn't win, she's going to get trashed by people who are going to say, all right, you did all that to draw all that attention to yourself and you didn't even perform. But she's still going to, just the fact that she did what she did at the trials is going to get her more attention than, again, anything she could do in track and field anyway. So she already earned herself a nice little payday or a book deal or something after the Olympics, no matter what the outcome is. But anyway, all that being said, and we're still on point number 2 here, the topic here today is victims are the new dictators. She has created power for herself by making an attention-drawing gesture of her victimhood. Her victimhood of them playing the national anthem while she's trying out to make the American Olympic team. She's mad that they played the national anthem. Again, logically makes no sense whatsoever, but she's a victim. And her victimhood is going to create power for her. And I'm not saying that in a sarcastic way. I mean this 100%. That's exactly what's going to happen. So this is what happens. The 3 things that happens when people paint themselves as victims. Number 1, it's a publicity stunt, so it draws a ton of attention to them. Number 2, they accrue sympathizers. So a bunch of people now are fans of Gwen Berry who couldn't even explain in words what exactly you do to compete in her event, and none of you give a damn. None of you know shit about her other than the fact that she's black and she wouldn't respect the flag during the national anthem. And number 3, now she gets to tell everyone else what they have to do to make her whole again, such as get her an endorsement deal, give her a book deal, put her on the cover of a magazine, follow her on Instagram. All of those things are either have happened or are going to happen, mark my words. While these things have helped, let me be clear, these things have helped people who actually deserve justice. People who have been done wrong in a serious way. They have actually been done wrong. being outed as victims has helped draw attention to their cause, gain sympathizers who will argue on their behalf, and made people pay attention to what needs to be done to make that person whole again. For example, when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis and that video went viral, and with him being a victim, did it draw attention? Yes, it did. Did it accrue a bunch of sympathizers to what happened to him? Yes, it did. And did it make a whole bunch of people make a whole bunch of noise that led to, that I think contributed to the guilty verdict for former officer Derek Chauvin? Yes, it did. It worked for people who are actual victims. What is happening, though, is this system is being abused by people who are not victims, but they paint themselves as victims because they see the opportunity to draw attention to themselves and the money that can come with it and whatever else that they want in life, whether it's money, attention, fame, likes. They want to boost their ego. They want to fill the hole in their soul because they just don't feel they're being paid enough attention to, or whatever it is that they want. They're using it for all these other reasons that have nothing to do with being actual victims of a serious situation. It's just making themselves look like victims because this effeminate energy has infected all of our communities. Like the Jeopardy winner, again, who apologized for holding up 3 fingers when people told him he was holding up the white supremacy symbol or white power symbol, whatever it was he was saying. Point number 3. And before I go on to point number 3, while, as I talked about with George Floyd, this has helped people who have deserved justice. And I talked about this in episode number 1804, why the Chauvin verdict is actually a win for black people and a serious positive win. And the one accomplishment that Black Lives Matter can list on their resume, the only accomplishment they can list on their resume, as far as I'm concerned, it gets abused when people start using it for these other purposes, such as publicity stunts like Miss Berry at the Olympic trials. And whatever is going to happen during the Olympics, guaranteed there are going to be some publicity stunts by Americans who win and get on that podium during the Olympics. That will draw more attention than the actual performances of the Olympics. Mark my words on that as well. Point number 3. Now, today's topic, once again, is victims are the new dictators. So what's going to happen with all of this? Everything that I'm talking about, what's actually going to happen? I just gave you a couple of predictions as far as the Olympics go. But other than that, for those people who think like me, if you're agreeing with a lot of what I'm saying here, understand that power is power. And people who are professional victims, in other words, people who are strategically trying to make themselves look like victims when they're actually not, they're losers. All right, power is power, and it will always be. Professional victims are losers who are right now temporarily taking advantage of the wave to create some power for themselves, but it's not real power. It's paper thin power. The only way to slow the spread, so to speak, of this victimhood being used as power is to stop bending to it. We have to stop assuaging victims or fake victims. I'm not talking about real victims, but fake victims. We had to stop, what's the word I'm looking for? Stop coddling these fake victims. Stop apologizing for things that victims accuse you of. If you know that you didn't do anything wrong, do not apologize to the victims. I told you how to stand up to the mob just recently in episode number 1875. Stop apologizing to the mob if you didn't do anything wrong. Do not bend your knee to wokeness. Every time you give the mob what they want, you further embolden them and encourage more would-be powerful people to instead become victims. See, every time you bend your knee to the mob, you're showing people who have a choice, whether they're going to be a powerful person or they're going to be a victim. They're trying to decide which one should I be. Your example of being a bitch and bending your knee to the mob is showing them, okay, being powerful is going to make me end up like him. Being a bitch, bending my knee to the mob, I might as well just be a victim. At least I'll be celebrated. See, you got to understand that your example is setting the precedent for the next wave of people to come behind you. So you must do your part to stop the spread, okay? This is your way of wearing a mask, okay? The way everybody said, Dr. Fauci said, wear a mask so we can stop the spread of the COVID virus. All right, you got to stop the spread of victimhood by not bending your knee to the mob when you know you didn't do anything wrong. And if the mob comes for you, telling them to kiss your ass and keep being a powerful person. But if you don't do your part to stop the spread, then you might give the virus a victimhood to somebody else, and you're only making it worse. Point number 4. Today's topic, once again, is victims are the new dictators. Here's a strategy. How to go about this. How do you actually do what I just said? What you have heard so far is the conversation I'm having with those of you who are not victims. All right, all of you who are like, no, I don't look at myself as a victim. I'm not seeing myself as a victim. I'm not, I don't agree with these people being victims, and you have, pretty much been nodding your head along with what I've been saying so far. Okay, but understand that when you're talking to somebody like me, you can talk the way that I'm talking today. We can agree on all these points that I've given so far. However, you got to understand, when you're talking to people who are victims, people who are habitual victims, people who are being influenced by this victim culture, and they're buying into this, and they're starting to figure out ways to strategically present themselves as victims, like Gwen Berry, like Colin Kaepernick, like others. When they see the power in the victimhood, you got to talk to them a little bit differently. Okay, you can't speak English to someone who only understands Chinese, and vice versa. Let me tell you what not to do. Do not lash out at victims or lecture them on why they shouldn't be victims. Don't do that, because it's not going to work. They're not going to hear you. I mean, they'll hear you, but they're not going to listen. They have heard it all before, and they have experience in responding to that. All right, they have their talking points in place that have been supplied to them by the race hustlers. And there's so many race hustlers out here and who have large followings. The race hustlers have already seeded them with all the built-in responses to those attacks. So don't do that, because it's not going to work. They'll be ready for your technique of telling them not to be a victim. They'll tell you that you're such an oppressor that you don't even understand your oppression. They'll tell you that the stronger your denial, the stronger the oppression. All right, so don't make the mistake of telling the victim that they're not a victim. All right, it won't work. Instead, here's what you do. Give them nothing to work with. Next time a habitual victim starts showing off their victimhood, don't give any energy to their victimhood. I remember as I was in my elevator in my building, and this woman told me that I was supposed to have a mask on. I just looked at her and I didn't say anything. I mean, I heard her, but I didn't say anything. I didn't respond. I didn't have a mask on. She did. She got off the elevator. That's how you handle victims. It happened again another time. I got on the elevator on a different floor. I was coming from the parking garage, and this guy, he was already in the elevator. And he had a mask on. He said, "Hey, man, do you have a mask?" And I just, same thing. I just looked at him, and he said it again. He pointed to his face. Maybe he was assuming I didn't understand what he said. He said, "Do you have a mask?" And again, I didn't say anything. And he just got off the elevator. And then the elevator door closed, and I went up to my floor. That's how you handle victims. When you're dealing with a victim, do not give any energy to their victimhood. Now, I'm not necessarily saying a person with a mask on is a victim. I'm just using that as an example. Again, because you'd be surprised how often people will take random shit that I say on the show out of context. But anyway, I'm just using that as an example. So, next time a victim starts being a victim, give no attention to their victimhood. Act like you don't even hear. You can look at them. You can look at them, but don't say anything. Don't engage. Don't argue with them. Don't tell them that they're wrong. Don't tell them that they're not a victim. Don't tell them that they can look at it differently. Don't say anything. Just look at them. And let them, it's like a baby. Like a baby starts crying. You don't start crying too to match the baby's energy. You just let them cry. And eventually they're going to stop crying because they're going to realize that it doesn't work. Let them cry. Eventually, when they realize the crying doesn't work, they'll shut the fuck up and get back to their business. That's how you handle habitual victims. They will eventually realize that victimhood thing does not pay off. There's no ROI, and they'll stop doing it. But you have to have the internal fortitude to not get sucked into their victimhood energy when they put it out there. That's the test. So it's not them being challenged, it's you being challenged. Point number 5. Today's topic is victims are the new dictators. Let me make sure that I'm being clear on one thing as we close this out. There are real victims out there. There are people out here who are seriously victims of serious shit that is going on in the world. No thanks to the habitual victims who are bastardizing victimhood in order to draw attention to themselves. But there are real victims out here. The problem is people are using it as an offensive weapon, again, more and more just as a strategy to gain for themselves. But Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, if you haven't read that book, I suggest you do. He said, if you are not in danger, do not fight. I say, if you are not wrong, do not apologize. If you don't feel like you've actually victimized the person in a negative, malicious way, tell the victim, pull your panties up, put your phone back on, and tell the mob, shut the fuck up, and then you go about your business. No back and forth, all right? No, you don't have to do a long diatribe. It doesn't have to become a debate. Because again, victims are really good at defending their victimhood. All right, they have more exercise at defending their victimhood than you have at shooting it down. So don't get into a debate with them. All right, they're good at it, and all it's going to do is further indoctrinate them into feeling like the victims that they are, the bitches that they are. So don't do that. Just let them be. And when they realize that there's no energy to be gotten from it, they'll stop. Trust me. Nobody does something for nothing. All that said, let's recap today's class, which is victims are the new dictators. Again, I mentioned at the top of this episode, other episodes I've done on victims. Make sure you go check those out so you understand why the victimhood is what it is, why it sells the way that it does. Now, it used to be a time when you needed to have real strength in order to create power. Now, being a victim is another avenue to power. You still need power to create power, but being a victim is another way that you can get there. And not necessarily real strength, but it looks like it on the surface. Point number one, due to the feminization of society and the emasculation of men, being a passive, helpless victim is now a cool thing to be. All right. Again, why is Black Lives Matter such a big deal? Because they only show up when there's a victim, because that's the way that it works now. Being a victim is cool, and being in power means you must be abusing or oppressing someone in order to get there. That's leading to point number two, victims now wield a good amount of power. On college campuses, a male is accused of sexual assault. The woman has all the power. Basically, you can get that man railroaded and run out of college because they can't even question the victim. They have no due process. They get run out of there. Thank you, Barack Obama and Joe Biden. They're the ones who put this policy into place. This is one example, but we see many. The result is being a victim is a quick and easy way to do three things. Number one, draw attention. Number two, accrue sympathizers. And number three, tell everybody else what they need to do to help you out. While it has helped people who actually deserve justice, it has been abused. And that's the problem. Point number three, what's going to happen with all this? For people who think like me, remember that power is always power and always will be. Professional victims are professional losers. And the only way to slow the spread is to stop bending to their loserdom and to their victimhood. Do not assuage a victim. Do not coddle a victim. Do not apologize if you didn't do anything wrong. Do not bend your knee to the mob. Every time you give them what you want, you are further emboldening them. So if you want to stop the spread, do your part, wear your mask, and do not give energy to victims. Number four, how do you go about this? When what you've heard is a conversation that people who are not victims can have with other people who are not victims. When you're dealing with someone who is a habitual victim, you cannot talk to them the same way. Again, just somebody doesn't speak Chinese, you can't speak Chinese to them. Do not lash out at them. Do not lecture them. Do not tell them that they shouldn't be victims. They've heard it before, and the race hustlers have trained them in how to respond to this by telling you that you're in such denial of your oppression, such denial of your racism, such denial of how oppressed you are that you don't even understand it. And don't make the mistake of arguing with them because, again, the race hustlers thought ahead and they planned for this. So do not try to fight this because it's not going to work. So what you do is respond to them the same way that I responded to people in my building who asked me why or if I was going to put a mask on when I got in the elevator with them, and just look at them and say absolutely nothing. Eventually, they're going to realize that what they say has no effect on you, and they'll get their asses off the elevator, and now you had an elevator to yourself. That's how it works. Just like if you had a baby who was crying, any of you who is a parent, if your baby is crying, you don't start crying to match the baby's energy. That's probably not going to help the baby. You stay in your space. What's the word that I'm looking for? Word is escaping me, but you stay in your place there and let the baby eventually come to your energy. You don't go to theirs. So point number five, to be clear, there are real victims out there in the world, but since people are abusing this victimhood thing, now we're starting to blur the line between people who seriously are victims and need help and people who are doing it in a way just to gain for themselves. Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, if you are not in danger, do not fight. Dre Baldwin says, and work on your game, if you are not wrong, do not apologize. Tell the victim to pull their panties up, put your thong back on, adjust it if necessary, tell the mob to shut the fuck up, and then go about your business. They will eventually go back about theirs. Send me a text. Tell me the best insight you got from today's masterclass. My number is 305-384-6894. Again, 305-384-6894. Work on your game. Dre all